Andrea, who's joined us tonight, has a wealth of experience in marketing, and she's recently just been made head of the marketing for the British Council, which is very exciting. And for many years she worked for the BBC as head of content strategy and head of brand and consumer innovation. So she has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. And although I've seen this presentation, I haven't heard Andrea talk, so I'm very much looking forward to this tonight. So I'm going to hand you over to Andrea now. Welcome, Andrea, and it's over to you.
Oh, hello, everybody. This is my first time of doing this, so bear with me a little bit because I've not used this sort of technology before, and as Janet said, there's little gremlins, so I can't press the buttons forward. So when I ask Janet, I'm not going to ask her to do it yet, to move on to the next slide. She'll move it forward, but just bear with us if it takes a couple of minutes to get going. So thank you ever so much for attending and giving up part of your evening to do this. I hope I can live up to the billing and expectations. But basically, what tonight is about is, well, the theme for the discussion is going to be about turning insight into action and growth. So basically, what that means is helping you understand how your consumers and your customers can help unlock how you can grow your business. And Janet, if you want to go to the next slide, that's great. Just a bit of housekeeping. We have started at 6:30. Just to say, if you've got mobile phones, can you just make sure they're on silent and things, so in case anything comes through or they affect things or you get distracted. Please do get involved, as Janice said. Put questions on the chat, and she will, from time to time, feed those back to me, and I can answer them. Yes, and we're going to have a couple of little quizzes in the presentation. I'd love it if you could take part and ask the questions, because it'd be great to get some feedback from you as I'm going along. This is obviously I can't interact with you, so it's great sometimes to have those quizzes just to get a bit of feedback. And up here I've put my contact details, so if there's anything you want to ask me offline, that's my personal email, not my work email. So if you want to get in touch with me, please do. Thank you. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is me. That's what I look like. It's always nice to put a name to a face. Yes, as Janet said, I've just taken over with the British Council, and I'm looking at strategic marketing, and that's a new function for them. So I look at everything from kind of consumer insight to kind of how we build our businesses and services to make them more functional for consumers and end users, and how we monitor how we're doing and what things we prioritise on. But I started out as a market researcher, so that's my background. Some of you may know a company called Mori. I used to be a social researcher there, doing lots of focus groups, questionnaires. So I spent my whole working life looking at consumers. And my big thing, basically, is no matter what context I'm in, I'm always asking people, whenever they talk about a new product, a new idea, business, who's it for, why are they going to come to it, and what do they need? And I think that's at the heart of my thinking. As Janet said, I'm an MBA alumni. I've also qualified from the Market Research Society and Chartered Institute of Marketing. I've done my exams. But I've worked across everything from sort of TV to looking at social justice. And one of the things I look at a lot, and it'd be interesting if anyone has any questions about this, is I've spent a lot of time working very complicated multinational matrix organisations and trying to get people to think about consumers, not just revenue. So if you have any questions or queries, I've got lots of scars in doing that, so I'm more than happy to answer them. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so first question, why do you care about consumers or customers? What's the point? You know, after all, shouldn't we just make money? We all know, this is obviously Steve Jobs, we all know that, as he says, if you get getting closer to consumers is really important. You've got to realise what they want before they want it themselves. We all hear these mantras, you know, the customer is always right, consumers matter more than anything. But do we really get why? And basically, I think this is a really simple quote. It's from Henry Ford. You know, the man who said you can have any car as long as it's black. But basically, I think this is a really good answer. He says it's not the employer who pays the wages. Employers only handle the money. It's the customer who pays the wages. So if you don't listen to your customers, and your customers will you haven't got a business. So that's why, at the end of the day, they're really, really important, because all our businesses, no matter what they are, whether they're public sector services or whether they're very commercial shops, require you to understand a consumer to have a business. Can I go to the next slide? Okay. And we've probably all seen this classic example of Kodak. It gets trolled out a lot. But I think it's a really good example of a business that didn't listen to the customer and what the consequence of that was. Back in the 70s, Kodak was one of the world's biggest brands. It had 90% of all the film market around the world. Believe it or not, it invented the first digital camera, and that's it, in 1975. But it believed its business was all about film. It didn't believe its business was about stories and memories and creating memories. And it failed to understand its customer needs. And as a result, it doesn't really exist anymore. Other people came in, digital cameras, digital technology. You didn't need film. They were focusing on the wrong thing because they thought they understood things. They weren't listening to what consumers were saying, which is, we want a way of capturing our memories. We want a way of capturing the things we see. We don't care how we do it. We just want to be able to do it. And they missed the whole digitization. And they were redundant. I mean, they still sort of exist, but nothing like they once did. So that's the high price I think you can pay. Can I go to the next slide, please? Let's go back one, thanks. No, back. Need to go back to, that's it. But a common mistake I think we make when we say we need to understand customers and we need to talk to customers and we need to understand what they want is we assume they know what they're going to need next. They understand, they can tell you how they're behaving, they can tell you what they care about, they can tell you what they like and dislike. But if you ask them what they want, you've got to be really careful because we assume they know all the options. And this is a really good example. Again, I keep quoting Henry Ford, but it's a very good example. He always said if he'd asked his customers what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. I thought I'd put up a nice picture of KFC with a horse because that's what the world would have looked like if you'd asked people in 1900 how you were going to get to your KFC. So he had to kind of take that they needed to get places faster. He'd had to take that people wanted a reliable way of getting from A to B, but the invention of the car would never have come from just asking people what they needed. He had to interpret that and understand it. So if you go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay. The other thing I think sometimes with consumer understanding, and it's something that's happening more and more and more, if you take this quote here from Eric Schmidt, who's the head of Google, there were 5 exabytes of information created by the entire world between the start of civilization and 2003. We now create that same amount of data and information every 2 days. There is a plethora of information out there, and that makes understanding consumer information and consumer insight more challenging, but also more important. As we have here a quote that says basically, we've got this, live in this world of big data. Everybody talks about analytics and global analytics, and we've got all this information, we've got all this data. But unless you're trying to work out how to understand that data and work out what it means, it can be very misleading. And an example here is from Google. In 2009, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but this is a good example of kind of how data can get you very, very wrong. Google thought that the answer to understanding consumers was algorithms. Algorithms were going to tell us everything. If only we could get the data, it would tell us all we needed to know about people. So they had this thing called flu trends in 2009, and it was based on, they were trying to predict how much flu would happen around the world, and therefore what drugs we would need, what services pharmaceutical companies would need to provide in order to meet this. Very sensible, makes a lot of sense. But what happened was that they massively overestimated the amount of flu. And I couldn't understand why. They looked over like, well, we're doing all the analytics, we're looking for how many people are looking at flu, what the interest is of it, where the peaks, troughs are, etc. This must be perfect. But what they failed to understand was most consumers who search for things about flu and want to understand flu misguidedly believe they have flu, and actually 90% of people who search for things on flu don't have it. They're just checking. They just want to understand what flu looks like. Have I got flu? Oh, no, I've got a cold, thank you very much. And so sometimes, you know, we have to be really careful when we look at consumer information and we're trying to understand it, that we don't overgeneralise and we don't oversimplify it. So if you go to the next slide, sorry. I think effective kind of what we call insight and understanding consumers and how you can build that for growth, it actually comes from three things. You have to listen to them, yes, but you have to understand the context within which they're working and understand what people mean and then act. What often people do is they listen and then they think they understand and then they act. And then they get it very wrong, as in the flu jabs. So, next slide, please, sorry. And that's kind of for me why, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, we haven't got any questions yet, but I've actually got one because I was thinking about this a lot, and we have to deal with data and information and measurements an awful lot. Is it, you know, is there a way of finding out, you know, out of all this information, you know, are there any rules to finding, you're talking about drilling down into information, I mean, how do you do that? Or is that too big a question?
It's a very big question with the whole industry called quantitative research. But basically, I think just be careful of information that is subjective. Always ask yourself, who told you this? Where does this information come from? So, for example, information about how much, so there was information about flu and prevalence of flu in countries and what you needed to do about it. If that came to me from, I don't know, making it up, Lemsip, a flu brand, I'd be really suspicious of it because what they want to tell me is everyone's worried about colds and therefore everyone's like the Lemsip. So sometimes, where the source of information from? Check where it's coming from. Have they got any bias? Who did they talk to, really? So you get a lot of polls on television which will say, you know, 97% of people think this. Extra. We find out it's from a phone-in, and a few people have decided to phone. They've chosen to phone, and therefore, you know, their reliability is quite small. So there's lots of checks you can do. So you go from, the best thing to do is take robust sources of information. But I think a lot of the time with data, it's a very complicated question to answer, but I think the most important thing is just question where it comes from and question its validity. So has someone got
that makes perfect sense. I have often seen those adverts, which my son, who's a mathematician, always points out to me, with hair products, for instance. Over 97% of people, and then in brackets 63 people were asked, how sort of slightly ridiculous they can be if you're not careful. Thank you, Andrea.
I mean, the basic rule of thumb, I would say, is if you've asked less than 100 people, take it with a pinch of salt.
Thank you, Andrea.
Anyway, so, do you have the next slide? Thank you. So
have I gone on too many?
No, you've gone fine. Yeah. So, in a question of why is this interesting, this webinar? I hope it is interesting, but I think it's really interesting for three groups of people to think about how you can better understand your customers and consumers. What are the tools and tricks? And that's what we're going to come on to really today. It helps sort of middle managers, because what I want to do is I'm hopefully going to give you a bit of a kind of things to think about, so that you're not going, like Janet says, you're not got this snowblind of information, you don't know where to start, giving you some kind of really quick, simple things you can do. It helps people who are set up their business, you know, how do you get sustainable growth? What kind of questions do you need to be asking about the people who are buying the stuff or using the services? And also kind of if you're, sorry, my screen's just now gone into save mode, so just bear with me a sec. If you're looking to shift your career, I'm trying to think of these are some basic things if you wanted to try and think about consumers or if you're involved in marketing that you need to consider. Okay, and next slide, sorry. Okay, so first of all, I think there's 5, if you're wanting to understand your consumers and get your handle on them and start to think about how they can help you, how connecting with them can help you grow your business, I think there's 5 things that are really important. A lot of the time, I come across it in work. People think the answer to understanding their consumers is to spend a lot of money on research. And my approach is to say, actually, sometimes I don't think you do. I think you need to understand them. What I said before, listen to them, understand them. Don't necessarily just collect more information about them. Data is just data. So 5 things I think people need to do in order to kind of really connect with their consumers and understand them better. You need to look outside. You need to kind of go out there and explore the outside world. We all work in organisations that are often very good at navel gazing, very good at, we kind of talk amongst ourselves about what people want. The only way to find out what they want is to go out and ask them, go out and connect with them, have a conversation with them. I think the other thing is about really focusing, and I'm going to come on to kind of really focusing on consumer. I get a lot of things when people say, well, we've got this group of people who buy this, and this group of people who buy this, and this group of people who go over here. You need to get it down to 1 or 2 groups of people that everybody understands and focus on them. And once you excite them and delight them, then you can move on to other people. Half the time it's more people are chasing lots and lots of stakeholders, lots of customers, and actually you don't understand any of them very well. I think partly for that is listening to customers, involving them and engaging them. And I think there's something where the way we speak with our consumers and customers is really changing. And lots of interesting things are happening in terms of how you might engage them, not just to get their opinion, but to test things with them, to try things out with them, to get them to work with you. I think another thing about consumers and understanding them is sharing their stories, sharing experiences, sharing ways that you've connected with consumers, and it brings them to life within your organisation, and demonstrating where you've had value with them. So in order to really drive consumer thinking within an organisation, you really need to demonstrate the value of understanding them. So as a result of listening to these people, we did this and this had this effect. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
Okay. So
well, we do the same thing here, Andrea. We try and share stories of our alumni who have wonderful stories to tell, so totally understand that.
Yes, and it's kind of like, you know, you can say something like, you know, 70%, I read something today, 70% of people who've gone on one of our programs says it's improved their life. That's a bare number. But if you can then put that next to meet Fred, here's what Fred did. He went on one of our courses, and it inspired him so much that now he's kind of gone on to be a teacher, and he's teaching people. And, you know, he's got a quote from him. It suddenly brings your consumers to life, and people can really relate to it and engage with it. It's not a statistic on a piece of paper.
Indeed.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so I have a question for you.
I've opened the poll.
Okay.
So please do answer, everyone.
Okay, so this question just basically says, on average, how many new customers, this is for most companies, do you think you need in order to generate the value of an existing one? So you had a customer and you lost them. How many more new customers do you need to get to give you that value, to what they spend with you, the time they spend with you, the money they spend with you? So the answer is A2, B3, C5, or D7.
Right, the answers are coming in thick and fast, Andrea, so I'll just give people a little longer to answer. And I suppose I should throw my hat into the ring while we're waiting for everybody to answer. So I would guess it's the biggest number, but I'll wait for our poll. I'd have said 7. Okay, I'm just going to close the poll now, and we're just waiting. There's a few seconds left while people finish, so just bear with us, everybody. This is the painful bit, I'm afraid, while we wait for the poll to finish. I'm sorry we did it quite quickly, but it is just a very, very quick answer poll, this one. So.
Okay, that's fine.
And we have... No, we have, I'll just give you the percentages if you just bear with me. We have 4% who think it's 2. We have 17% who think it's 3, 33% think 5, and 33% think 7. And I'm afraid I may have been a bit quick because 13 people I don't think had time to answer, so I apologise. I'll try and leave the next poll on a little longer. Okay, Andrea, is that as you expected?
Yes, no, I mean, a very engaged and knowledgeable audience, because the answer is 7. And I think this is another reason, if you needed another reason, as to why looking after your customers is really, really important, because it costs 7 times as much to get another one. So not only are your customers important because they pay the wage bill at the end of the day, but they're also important because if you lose one, the cost of getting a replacement is really, really high. So a lot of the time, sometimes companies start creating new products and chasing new customers and diversify. And actually, it's the thing that makes most of them go to the wall because they can't service them very well. But if you just lose one customer, it costs you 7 times as much to get them back. And that's why it's really important to hang on to them. And that's why so many companies put so much money and effort into customer service, customer experience, because the stark fact is it costs a lot to get another one. Do you want to go to the next slide? Well done, everyone. Thank you for being far more knowledgeable than I was. I would have guessed about 3, but I just had to do that bold originally. So one of the other things I was coming back to is this, you know, we talk about consumers and it's sort of, again, it's like, well, you know, and these are sort of, I wanted to put up things that I've heard a lot when I've had to deal with internal stakeholders, to deal with clients when I've been in agencies, etc. Is what I call the ostrich head in the sand thing, is what, but, you know, people say to me things like, oh, but my customers will tell me what I want, they will just tell me, they're going to talk to me. So often salespeople sort of say that. They'll say, yeah, but I know, I talk to them. What you do is you talk to a small group of them. But, oh, yeah, I know what they want. And I'd say, remember, faster horses. Your customers are really good sometimes at telling you, you know, in feedback forms and things, what they already know. You have to understand them and get a bit deeper under the skin. You get people telling you things like, well, it's all in the data. Data's going to tell us everything we need. And I'd say, you know, remember Google. Data is only as good as the person who interprets it. In the hands of someone who doesn't really understand it, it can lead you down a lot of blind alleys. And obviously, I always no substitute for experience. I've been doing this a long time, and I think I'll find that I know what people want. Again, remember Kodak? They all thought they knew what people want. But they, again, weren't listening and understanding their consumers. They were just assuming they knew what they needed and how wrong that was. And then the 4th thing would be people saying, so you go back a bit.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's all trial and error. You know, you just have to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. You know, we'll have a few goes. It gets very expensive to keep launching products or launching ideas or opening new things on a whim. So, you know, the consumer bit can help you lower that risk. Okay. Next slide, please.
Oh, and I've gone too far. Sorry, right. Back again.
The classic approach, and it's probably the approach we all kind of learn when we go on marketing courses historically, or I've certainly always been told it historically, is that to understand your customers, you identify your customer, you listen to them, you act, and then you review. Classic feedback loop. I'm going to be, you know, I figure I've been asked to do this, so I'm not going to just say what any textbook would tell you to say. But for me, I think that forces the engagement with the consumer to be a stage in a process. It's a listening stage. And once you've listened, you stop listening. Because we know. So now we're going to act, and then we will review our progress. And what that does is it kind of assumes you're an expert and you know better than them. Sorry, someone's just walked into something, so I'm just being sorry for any distraction. I think what you need to do, if you go to the next slide. Okay. Next slide. Okay. My approach would be much more that understanding the context within which you're working and identifying who your consumer sits at the heart of everything and is a constant. You're constantly listening to the context. You're constantly listening to consumers. So when you're actually running your business, sorry, someone's walking around me. I do apologise if I sound a bit distracted. What you need to do is listen and engage the consumers. You develop and activate things with consumers. You demonstrate your value with your consumers, and you review and refine things with your consumers. They are at heart and integral to what you're doing. Experiencing expertise and engagement with them is really key. Getting their expertise, engaging with them, and co-creating, co-developing with them. They're not a stage where you just listen to them once and then you forget about them. They're something that you should be doing all the time. Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Your next slide, sorry.
Yes, there aren't any questions coming in at the moment, Andrea, so shall I move on to the next slide?
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so if that's kind of what I was saying in terms of how do you unlock your consumers' potential to kind of build your business and use them to help you grow what you're doing. And that was a kind of model. What I'm going to go through now is just go through each stage of that. So what do I mean by that and what might you do? So we take from theory into action. Okay, so the first step of that, I think, really, when you're looking at consumers and you're looking at the world around you, is understanding the context within which you're sitting. Okay, so I can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So I think what you first need to do when you look at consumers is you need to understand, as I say, the context within which you're working. Very nice and highbrow here, the quote from Proust, but I always like it because I think it demonstrates what I mean. It says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So it's not about always having to think of new things and going out and looking at new markets and new groups of people. Actually, it's taking time to kind of observe what's going on in the world and just take a different point of view, look at it slightly differently. And I think it's kind of going on a voyage of discovery, and it's understanding the context within which consumers are working. So what are the social factors, what are the political factors, what's the environment within which you're working, what kind of groups are emerging, what are the big trends going on out there. It's not just something for marketing or a strategy department to do, it's something that all the companies need to get involved and engaged in. Janet, can you just talk for 2 seconds? I've just got a bit of a problem. I won't be 2 seconds. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. Yes, okay, Andrea. We can hear a lot of noise going on in the background with Andrea. I guess somebody's come into the office. Myself working in an open plan office, so I know the difficulties of that. So please bear with us, and I do apologise. I'm sure Andrea will be back shortly.
I'm back.
But,
my problem,
you're
sorry,
back.
I do apologise. It's a cleaner in the office. And he's
Right.
kind of moving all the desks around. I was trying to so I'm very, very sorry about that. So basically, he's gone now, so I can talk. So,
Okay.
yeah, so basically, one of the things about trying to understand the consumers, the first person to start is to try and understand the context within which they live and which they're working. And I think that's something that often people think of as something that a consultant does. You bring the consultant in. Oh, we need to understand what trends are. Bring someone in. Or ask the marketing department. And I actually think it's something that you can do. A company needs to kind of go on together, or a group of people. You need to engage everybody in it. It's fun. You just want to try and understand what's happening. So the person who works in the region, maybe I was with people today who's from South Asia. They know everything that's going on out there. They can feed that back. You can go and I once got a load of people who were doing a science project. We got them to go and spend time with people going to the science museum to understand what they were really liking, what were they engaged with, how were they enjoying it, rather than just make it something that other people do, like focus groups and marketing. And I think you really just need to understand what's happening in the outside world and always be doing that. Always, be challenging yourself about what's changing, looking at trends, reading papers, just really being nosy, what I call nosiness. So that's the first thing I think people need to do. And we all know kind of, if you go to the next stage, the classic thing that's involved in that. Just the next slide, please, Janet, sorry. We all know the kind of classic model that we're given of how you do this. So you've got your organisation, you look at the competition, you look at your stakeholders, you look at your customers, you look at the world trends, demographics, you look at the industry and how that's doing. That's very theoretical, and that makes you take the consultant in. That makes you go, all right, we need a consultant to do that, we need marketing. But actually, if you go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Sorry. I think something else you can do to understand that context, and this is kind of chunked it up into 3 things. Observing your customers and your consumers, the people who use your products and services, the people who you engage with, the people you're selling things to. in its fancy way, that's called ethnography, and it costs a lot of money, and you pay anthropologists to do it. But actually, you know, if you own a shop, go and sit in it. If you've got a rival shop down the road, go and find out what that's like. You know, go and be a customer there. It's like if say you were doing, you're I don't know, transport company, get on a bus. Go and experience it like a customer. Go and see what it feels like as a customer. Watch people in a situation. I don't know, if you have a, you know, if you're at a call centre, try ringing it up. See what happens to you. See how it feels. You know, the other thing about it is that I'm then asking a lot of questions. So if you're dealing with, if you can put yourself in the shoes and go and experience something, ask them how they feel about it. Ask them how does it work. And the more I think you can engage your whole organisation in doing a lot of this stuff and experiencing what your customers experience and relating to them and having a dialogue, the more it gets embedded. Stops being theory, and in the end it starts being kind of familiar and it starts to feel less scary. One of the best things, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was running a lot of work for Duracell, and they're not doing very well, you know, batteries discussed. It's kind of something that perhaps one of those kind of obsolete technologies increasingly now. But they went off to America and they went camping with families who were using torches and using lots of battery equipment because they were camping. But these were families who kind of were, you know, their target audience who would use this stuff. And they spent a lot of time with them, talking to them, asking them questions. I mean, that's very expensive, but it got them to, he said it was brilliant. They actually stopped thinking about it as them and us, and they started experiencing how they use this stuff themselves. It really changed the way they thought about things. So I think, to me, one side of it, yes, you've got all that macro understanding the market context and trends and everything, but actually look outside, go and spend some time with people, ask them loads of questions and experience what they do. You know, if you were a manager of a sports centre, go and have a swim, go in the changing rooms at different times of day, walk around. There's lots of people who do a lot of this stuff, and I think it's just really interesting at how much it enables you to connect much better with your consumers and understand them much better.
Talking of questions, Andrea, we've had a really good question come in from Mark. People in organisations often have a lot in common with each other. Is there a danger that their ideas of the future will be similar and possibly at variance with the customers to the extent that they don't believe the feedback?
I think it's absolutely true. Absolutely true in a lot of cases. I mean, I used to work at the BBC. It's a very middle-class, highly educated organisation. So there aren't many people there who don't have degrees. There aren't many people there who haven't gone to very prestigious universities in production. It's a fact. And it's sometimes very difficult for them to put themselves in the minds of a viewer. Say to a show like EastEnders, a very big popular soap. I'm sorry, I appreciate people from different places, but it's a very big popular TV soap. It's hard for them to do that, but actually it's really interesting when you make people spend a bit of time with those people, because it becomes real to them. So I think what's good about doing some of this stuff, and it's hard to persuade people to do it at first, but what's good about kind of starting to embed some of this thinking with people is that once they've experienced it and once they've talked to people, they start to question their perceptions. If it becomes the research people coming in and telling us about what's happening in the outside world, actually, although they'll believe the data, it doesn't really sink in sometimes. They kind of go, yeah, we get that, yeah. But sometimes if they walked a mile in someone else's shoes, it's much harder for them to dismiss it then. You run a risk that they'll come back with a kind of very extreme view, so you have to be careful sometimes what you expose people to. But I think it suddenly makes it real, and it stops it being abstract. Because I think what Mark's saying, absolutely, I think sometimes when you get consultant reports and things, or if you just leave them with their own devices, they don't really, it doesn't feel real to them. It's like, well, I know. It's like, well, we come back to that option and understand. I know what people want, really. I really know what they want. But you stand them in front of a very loud and outspoken, teenager telling them about what they really think, and if they're, this is like the Alton Towers, a fairground ride, and suddenly it becomes quite real. Does that help?
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so the other thing I think for me in bringing consumer understanding into an organisation and really embedding it and helping you grow is identifying who your consumer is. And I've been really careful here to say consumer, not consumers, because I think what often happens, and if you go on to the next slide, is we get into a situation. Can you go to the next slide, please, Janet? Is that all right?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. We get into a situation where we're chasing lots of people because we've got an idea that we need to engage lots of groups of people. So we need this service and this service and this product and this thing. And I think, take it out of theory, the reason I think this quote here kind of sums it up well. It's the CEO of Superdry talking about Marks and Spencer's. So for those of you who aren't from the UK, Superdry is a retail store that's grown out of nowhere in 5 to 10 years. It looks Japanese, it's not, but it's aimed very much at kind of urban 20-somethings who think they're probably cooler than they really are, but it looks like a cool, funky sports brand. It's kind of slightly geeky, but it's been incredibly successful. Marks and Spencer's, on the other hand, of course, for those who are British will know very well, but who aren't, incredibly successful for many years retailer, department store, has lost its way a little bit. And one of the things he's saying is the most important thing they need, speaking about Marks and Spencer's, need to do is listen to their customer and realise who they're trying to target. He says you can't start trying to attract new customers until you've understood the current ones first. So M&S predominantly was a brand for middle-aged, midlife and older, very female and very safe, but very reliable and trustworthy. And they've not done very well, and a lot recently. And a lot of it is because they've been chasing young fashion, or they chase, they've chased a lot of kind of we're doing. So they've gone from having a model Twiggy to having Mining Class, who ran, who was a pop star, to various people dominating this brand, and actually losing sight of the fact that the average person who went in there probably was a 50-year-old woman who was slightly conservative and wanted a jumper that she could put in the washing machine. And they've really struggled. And he's saying, actually, you need to remember that's your customer. You can have all these other things, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure she's happy. Because if she's not happy, you haven't got a business. So I think it's a really good example of getting it wrong. Marks and Spencer's have got it a bit wrong. They've tried to be all things to all people and forgotten who the old customer was.
Andrea, this leads us on to an interesting question from Kevin. He says that it's extremely interesting, and Andrea, he says, is making it extremely easy to understand. But as a manager within the fire service, I find it difficult to engage with our customers. Is there any advice on how these concepts and principles can be applied in a public sector environment? I think that's a very interesting question.
Oh gosh, that's a very hard question. And I don't know much about the fire service, so I will bear with me. I think it's very difficult sometimes in a service that's for everybody. I mean, I used to work for the BBC, and people would say, oh, it's for everyone. Life is for everybody. Everybody is our customer. The whole of Britain are our customers. But at the end of the day, you do know people who use your service more than others, or people who rely on it more than others, or you've got stakeholders that you have to really manage. It isn't always possible to get it to one customer. I just think that's an idea. But say with the fire service, it's kind of understanding, the local community is your customer, maybe that very local area, or it might be, I mean, I don't know enough about the fire service, but it might be that actually most people who use the fire service tend to be certain types of people. And it's sort of thinking about how can you go out there and get to know them better? How can you go and work with them better? I don't know. I mean, is the fire service a bit of more of a B2B? Because actually, maybe it's the emergency service people who put them through. I mean, that would be a hard one for me to answer about the fire service because I don't know enough about how it works. But say, like a doctor's surgery, at the end of the day, the people who tend to use it more than anyone else are people with small children and the elderly. You need to work, that service needs to work for them best, because they're the people who are going to come through your door more than anybody else. Do you see what I mean?
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Andrea.
It's
yes,
a very
and I think
difficult question. Oh,
it is a difficult question. It's an interesting question, but difficult. But
yes,
thank you.
Next slide.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so but one of the, when I was saying about identifying your core customers, I had this conversation actually about 4 hours ago with somebody whose first words to say to me about why they understood their customers was they were doing a consumer segmentation. We've got a consumer segmentation. It's brilliant. I think things like this are very expensive ways of trying to understand who your consumers are. They cost an awful lot of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Lots of big corporations do them. Most of them end up in a drawer because they're really complicated. And they're very good. If you've got one, you know, you can work with it. But this is one about, I've just pulled it off the internet. They're very slow. They often take months to do. They cost a fortune, 6 figures, not 5. They're quite complicated. And what they do is they tell you what's happening now. Most of the time they tell you what people think. You know, if you go back to that faster horse, they tell you what people think they want and they need. But they tend to often have 5 or 6 segments that you've got to chase, and you can't work out which one's more important than the other. And I think when they go into organisations, people often sit down and go, I don't know which one's more important. They all look interesting. What do I do? Well, they try and do lots of products and services that map onto these things. And so my thing with understanding your customer, if you go to the next slide, is actually you can have the Rolls Royce consumer segmentation, but you don't need loads of money. And maybe this helps with assignment.
Actually, we've had someone who's just come back on that, going back to that question from Robert. What about offering fire extinguisher training to all staff in local businesses, or as a day-long training exercise for individuals?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I do know actually that the Open University for their fire wardens do offer training, and we have someone come in from the fire service to do it because a while ago I was a fire warden. So that's it. That's a good point. Thank you. Anyway, sorry.
And it's brilliant. That's really good. It's like thinking laterally about how you're going to meet your customers. You know, how am I going to meet them? I never meet these people unless they're in an emergency. So that is a really, you know, that is actually a really good answer to that question. So
thank you.
Yes. So in terms of identifying your core customer with consumers, if you weren't having some grandiose segmentation, you know, you're not in a big management company and they've commissioned some outside company to come in and tell you all of this, how can you go about doing that? I think there's 4 criteria you start to look at when you say, who are my customers, consumers? So I'm using those words interchangeably. I know technically they are slightly different, but let's just use customers for now. You've got, where's the current value coming from? So who spends the most money or the most time, because it might not be money, with me? Who are the most important people in terms of value? So if it's a park, who visits me the most? If it's a shop, who shops with me and spends the most? How big are they? Where are they? How far do they go? If you go to the next slide, sorry, I've put these little things up here.
Sorry.
No, it's all right, don't worry. I didn't say that. Right, okay. That makes it easier. So who are the largest group of consumers that come to me, and where are they? So when I was saying at Marks and Spencer's, at the end of the day, the bulk of people who walked through that door were older and quite conservative and wanted quality, and they wanted reliability. And that wouldn't change, really. It never changed for 100 years. Why would it change? You've also got, what group of people are growing the fastest? So sometimes, you know, you have to keep an eye on groups of people who, they weren't that important to you, but suddenly there's loads of them and they're everywhere. And they might be really important as a consumer group for me. So people who weren't buying something, so say for Apple Mac, 10 years ago, my mum would never have had a MacBook, you know. But actually, you know, everything's Apple because she loves it because it's so simple. And so suddenly that group of people has become really important to them. And then the other thing looking at here is saying, who shares your values and loves you the most? Your core customers are people who care about you. They're not people who don't. So it's, for example, you know, if we take Marks and Spencer's and apply it on there, what people spent the most money with you? Probably slightly more middle class people who got a bit more money because it's not been that cheap. Who are the large business? It was those women, those middle-aged women. Are they growing? Yeah, they are, because demographically that audience is growing massively. There's more and more older people. There aren't more younger people. There's more older people in the UK, because it's a UK brand. I know, I appreciate it's completely different to other parts of the world. Who shows you values and loves you the most? My mum loves you. Why don't you delight her? So it's actually kind of, you start to see, right, okay, I can see who some of these people might be. So if you go to the next slide.
Andrea, we're starting to run out of time, so I might have to speed you up a little bit.
Yeah,
and I'm going to suggest that we don't do the polls, actually. So
no, that's fine. I'll hurry up.
Okay.
So basically, in terms of when I was saying about identifying a core customer, we did this in, this is BBC Earth, which is a natural history band for the BBC. And in terms of those 4 quadrants, we found that the people who spent the most with us were families. We looked at, that was sales data. You know, we could look at what people were buying and we could see the type of people. We didn't need a segmentation. We could look at the fact that these people were really interested in lots of our products. They bought books, they bought DVDs. Okay, we sell more things. They've got a lot of disposable income, so they're good people to have. But also, they loved the BBC. So that halo effect happens. So you start to identify these people as your most treasured group. And once you have that, it doesn't have to be quantitative. You can do that subjectively. But once you've got that group of people, you know who they are and you know who your customers are, and you might save yourself £100,000. Can I have the next slide? Sorry, I'll be quick. Okay, I'll rattle through this. So I think in terms of how you go through the process, it's about listening and engaging. So if you go to the next slide. We've talked a lot about this, but I think this is an interesting statistic. 91% of unhappy customers will not do business with you again. Keep them happy. Listen to them, engage with them. That's the point. I think that fire thing is a fantastic idea. Go out and talk to them. I mean, fire service is strange because you don't have any choice when you press that 999 button. But, you know, they're still your customers and you still want them to like you and you still want them to respond to you. So next slide. This is an example of the other thing to do about listening, engaging with them, is going where they are. When BBC One Extra launched, they had to decide what was going to go on the playlist. This, for those of you who are not in the UK, BBC One is a Radio 1 Extra. Radio 1 is a national station. Radio 1 Extra was urban, kind of grime, hip-hop, for kids, street kids, you know, very hip kids. They hadn't got a clue what the playlist was. Most people, you know, who worked in those radio stations, white, middle class, they didn't pretend that they knew this stuff, but they knew there was a market and they knew they wanted a station. So they talked to the DJs. They know the DJs because there's a smaller group of people. They found the DJs, and from the DJs they found the clubs, and at the clubs they found the kids, and then they brought those kids in and got them to tell them what music they should be playing. So going where your consumers are is really, really, it can be a really good way of getting value and getting people to really engage with what you're doing and act as advocates. It's not just about sitting in your office and not listening to them. So if you go 2 slides on, that'd be great. And I think the other thing I was going to say here very quickly was just to say, when listening and engaging, make sure you question your assumptions. This is an exercise that I've seen done a few times, and when you're talking about getting people in your company to engage with consumers, it's an exercise where you bring there's a box of goods that gets brought in. And what you're asking, was done with daytime television, we were asked to work out who we thought the box belonged to. This box had a lot of old trinkets in it, and a Bible, and kind of little toys, and kind of twee things. And we thought it was an old lady's box. So we decided she was an old lady, and we made all these assumptions about her. And then what they did, they brought her in. And she was a viewer of daytime, a massive fan of daytime, and she was a young black woman who lived in Hackney. The religious stuff was because she was religious, she was younger, she had a very religious persuasion. The trinkets all belonged to her family. Sometimes just question your assumptions about what you think consumers want, and that's quite a good trick to get people involved and get them to engage. It's bringing people in that they don't expect. Okay, next slide, sorry. And next one, sorry, after that one, that's fine. And I would just say, quickly, is, you know, when we say about listening engaging, the one thing I would warn people to be really wary of is social media. This is a quote from, this is a statistic from the States. 16% of adults are on Twitter in America. We often listen to the tweets and we think that they're real. Only 3% of American adults tweet. So when you see things, like I've put a quote here about British Airways, just be careful. They're very self-selecting. They're what I would call praise and grumble people. So just be wary of what you're hearing as feedback. Okay. Okay, I think I've kind of, with this bit here, I've just, you know, I think we're kind of, I can skip a lot of this. If you go to the next slide, I'm just very conscious of time. What I've just put up here is a classic way we develop and activate services and products. And really, all I want to say here is, we only, again, engage with consumers when we pilot things and we evaluate them. But actually, the world is changing. So you go to the next slide. And I think this is how you can help get consumers can really help you grow. This idea of always being in beta, if you go to the next slide, sorry. It's like using consumers rather than somebody to test whether something works or find out their opinion. You're using them to scope what you're doing, using them to develop things, to test things and refine them. So bringing them in, those Radio 1 guys coming in and actually helping you work out what your playlist is and then what your offer is. They went back to them time and time again to refine that and then to launch more products. So you go to the next slide, sorry. This is just about Burberry, and this is what they've done in terms of using the networks to develop and activate things. What they've done there is that they launched a campaign which was to called the Art of the Trench. And they wanted people to show them how they were using their trench coats around the world and put photos up. They had 7.5 million people do that from 150 countries. So the people got really engaged in the classic Burberry coat. The sales went up 50% because they got people to show them what they were doing, and they were demonstrating, they were talking about the coat, they were sharing all their things. But now what Burberry do, they've taken it on further. They said, this is great, people love our stuff and they want to engage with it and they want to play with it. They now launch all of their catwalk shows first on social media. So at the same time that catwalk happens, very exclusive, it all goes straight onto social media, and they use the power of their consumers and their network to sell their products and to be champions for their projects. And it's proving really effective for them. Have I got to finish now, Nat? So I probably have.
I think we will have to wrap it up now, Andrea.
That's fine. I was just going to go back, but if I go to the end, I go back 4 slides on. There's one thing I was going to show you just to say the value of it, and I think it's just that slide here. Is when you've done all that and you've engaged them, what you need to do is show the value to your organisation of consumers. So the telling of the stories, measuring your success, and having real champions, using them, the Burberry do as real champions. And I think Six Music was a radio station that the government wanted to close, BBC wanted to close. It had only 100,000 listeners. And this is how having the power of your consumers can change, really powerful consumers can change everything. 25,000 people sent emails in to save this radio station.
I was one of them.
Yeah. It's still open. It's incredibly popular. People love it. And that's what, you know, if you engage your consumers really early on, you involve them in what you do, you embed them into what you do, they can actually really transform your business and protect your business going forward. Is that okay? Sorry, I've had to put the phone on because someone's now decided to hoover.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you
I'm sorry
to
it was a bit speedy in the end. I do apologise.
Thank you for all our attendees bearing with us with all our gremlins we had tonight. I do apologise, and I hope this hasn't put you off, Andrew, and that you will come back again another time. So I'll say good night to you all now. I'm going to stop sharing my desktop, so we'll go back to the rather boring page. But thank you all, and I wish you good night, and please join us on the next webinar. Okay.